Okay, so you sent over all this stuff about truck pardons for those involved in the January 6th Capitol riot, and
Yeah,
it's a lot.
it is. It really is. I mean, we're not just talking about like legal documents and stuff here. We're talking about the raw aftermath of something that was incredibly divisive, and then, yeah, throwing gasoline on an already raging fire.
Yeah, so let's rewind for a second just to kind of like set the stage. January 6th, 2021, the day a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol building trying to disrupt the certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory.
Right.
It was, I mean, shook the nation to its core.
And for years, the Justice Department was focused on all the investigations, the trials, thousands of hours, mountains of evidence, all aimed at holding those people accountable.
Right, and then January 21st, 2025, his first day back in office.
Yeah.
Trump issues over 1,500 pardons for individuals involved in the Capitol riot.
Including some convicted of violent offenses, which, it's unprecedented. It's potentially the largest mass pardon in U.S. history.
Over 1,500 pardons. I mean, to put that into perspective, most presidents issue a few hundred pardons during their entire time in office.
Right.
This is like sweeping, this is like trying to rewrite history.
Exactly. And it raises some serious questions about, what are the limits of presidential power and what is justice in this country?
And we even have, we have this video of William Sarsfield, one of the pardoned rioters, being released from prison, still wearing his orange prison shoes. He credits the power of prayer for his release and says he's looking forward to relaxation without the feds over my butt.
It's a striking image, and it kind of, it encapsulates how raw this situation is.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
So how are people reacting to these pardons? I mean, there's got to be some pushback, right?
Oh, absolutely. The reactions have been incredibly polarized. On one hand, you have Trump and his supporters who see this as a correction of what they think was an overreach by the Justice Department.
Okay, so they view these people as political prisoners.
In a way, yes. They believe that these individuals were targeted for their political beliefs and that the pardons are a necessary step towards reconciliation.
But on the other side, you have critics who see this as a dangerous precedent
Yeah.
that undermines accountability for political violence.
Right. And it's not just Democrats. Even some Republicans like Lindsey Graham have voiced concerns about, what are the consequences of such a sweeping act of clemency?
So we have this massive clash of perspectives. But what about the legality of it all? Does the president even have the authority to issue this many pardons?
Well, that's one of the key legal questions being debated right now. The Constitution does grant the president broad pardon powers, but there's no clear consensus on whether there are any limits to those powers, particularly in a case like this where, the sheer scale of the pardons is unprecedented.
Right. And beyond the legal questions, there are ethical ones too, right?
Yeah.
What message does this send about political violence? What are the implications for the rule of law?
Oh, absolutely. These are weighty questions with no easy answers. It's a complex situation that touches on the very foundations of our, legal and political system.
Yeah, it's a lot to process for sure. And here's where it gets really interesting. Some of these pardoned Capitol rioters are being rearrested. How is that even possible? I thought a pardon meant you were completely off the hook.
Well, it's not always that straightforward. You see, a presidential pardon typically only applies to federal offenses. Some of these rioters may be facing state-level charges, which the pardon doesn't cover.
So it's like a loophole. They can still be held accountable at the state level for their actions.
Precisely. And it highlights the complex interplay between federal and state law, especially in a case with such high political stakes.
Speaking of complex legal situations, we can't ignore this other revelation, the involvement of undercover FBI sources during the Capitol riot.
Yeah.
This came to light in a December 2024 Inspector General report.
Right.
This adds a whole new layer of complexity to an already complicated story. It raises questions about the FBI's role in the events leading up to January 6th and whether their actions constituted entrapment. I bet this is fueling all sorts of conspiracy theories on the right.
Absolutely. This revelation plays right into existing narratives about deep state involvement and government overreach, It's like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to separate fact from fiction in a situation like this, especially when emotions are running so high. And this actually reminds me of the work of Robert Mazur, a retired DEA agent who specialized in undercover operations.
Yeah.
His experiences, as discussed in the LEO Roundtable podcast, really shed light on the ethical and legal tightrope involved in these types of investigations.
It's a good comparison. Mazur's work demonstrates the complexities and the potential pitfalls of using undercover agents, especially in politically charged situations.
And now with Trump back in office, he's nominated Kash Patel to head the FBI.
Right. Patel's appointment is certainly raising eyebrows given his close ties to Trump and his previous statements, seemingly downplaying the severity of the January 6th attack.
He's been making headlines recently with his statement rejecting violence against law enforcement, but some view it as an attempt to distance himself from his past comments and appease critics.
Exactly. It remains to be seen whether Patel can bridge the divide between Trump's base and law enforcement, especially given the anger over the pardons within the FBI's ranks.
Mhm.
Can he truly maintain the Bureau's independence and integrity in the face of political pressure?
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, to
Yeah.
say the least.
Yeah.
And then you have people like Michael Fanone, a former police officer who was brutally beaten during the riot, who now fears retribution from pardoned individuals.
Yeah, Fanone's story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of these pardons. He's filed for protective orders, feeling for his safety.
It's a stark reminder that we're not just talking about abstract legal debates here.
Yeah.
There are real people whose lives are being deeply affected by these decisions.
Precisely. These pardons have real-world consequences, and we're only just beginning to see how they'll play out. We were just talking about Michael Fanone, the former police officer beaten during the riot, and his situation really highlights the fact that these pardons aren't just some kind of political chess move, They have real consequences for real people.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the legal arguments and the politics,
Right.
but we can't forget about the human impact of all of this. I mean, these pardons have ripped open old wounds and created new ones.
Absolutely. We're talking about something that fractured families, friendships, our sense of national unity, and these pardons have just poured fuel on that fire.
Yeah, think about the families of those who were killed or injured during the riot. Their sense of justice and closure has been completely disrupted.
Yeah, they're grappling with the fact that the people responsible for the pain and suffering their loved ones endured have basically been given a free pass.
Right, it's a wound that's been ripped open again. And it makes you wonder, can we truly heal and move forward as a country when there's such a deep divide in how we view justice and accountability?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, these pardons are like a microcosm of the larger polarization we're facing as a society. It's
Yeah.
almost as if we're living in two different realities.
Yeah, it feels like we can't even agree on basic facts anymore, let alone complex issues like this.
You're right, and that makes it incredibly difficult to even have a productive conversation about how to move forward. How do you find common ground when there's such a fundamental disagreement about basic principles?
And we also can't ignore the emotional toll this is taking on the law enforcement officers who are injured defending the Capitol.
Right, a lot of these officers are now facing, a wave of threats and intimidation from pardoned individuals who feel emboldened by Trump's actions.
Yeah, it's a terrifying situation. These officers put their lives on the line to protect our democracy, and now they're being targeted for simply doing their jobs.
Yeah, it underscores the potential consequences of such a sweeping act of clemency and, the unintended ripple effects that it can have.
And speaking of consequences, let's circle back to Kash Patel, Trump's pick to head the FBI.
Right, right.
I mean, his appointment is already facing a lot of scrutiny. Can he restore trust in law enforcement both within the ranks and among the public? It's a monumental task considering his close ties to Trump and the skepticism he faces from many within the FBI. I mean, some people are worried that he'll prioritize loyalty to Trump over upholding the rule of law.
That's a valid concern. I mean, the FBI needs to be seen as an independent and impartial body, not an arm of any political party or ideology.
Right. His every move is going to be watched very carefully, especially in light of these pardons.
Absolutely, and this is where those rearrests we talked about earlier come back into play. Even though a presidential pardon can wipe the slate clean for federal crimes, it doesn't prevent state-level prosecutions.
Oh, right. So those pardoned individuals who are facing state charges could still end up back in court.
Exactly, and we're already seeing cases where this is happening. It's a legal labyrinth, and it's likely to generate a whole new wave of lawsuits and court challenges.
Wow, this whole situation really highlights the complexity of our legal system and that delicate balance between federal and state power.
It's a fascinating case study in federalism and, one that legal scholars will be dissecting for years to come.
And then there's that whole issue of the FBI's involvement in the events leading up to January 6th, which is still shrouded in mystery.
Right.
That December 2024 Inspector General report revealed that undercover FBI sources were present during the Capitol riot, but the full extent of their involvement is still unclear.
Right, and of course this has fueled all sorts of conspiracy theories and accusations of entrapment from those who believe the FBI orchestrated the entire event.
It's added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted situation, and it's made it even harder to have a nuanced conversation about what really happened that day. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. each layer reveals something even more intriguing and even more troubling.
And the deeper we dig, the more we realize how much we still don't know about the events leading up to January 6th and, all the forces that were at play.
Yeah, and how much is at stake? We're not just talking about a historical event here. We're talking about the future of our democracy.
Precisely, these pardons strike at the very heart of who we are as a nation. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past, our present, and our future.
They demand that we engage in a thoughtful and nuanced dialogue about how to move forward as a society.
But how do we even begin to have that dialogue when we're so divided, when we can't even agree on basic facts or principles?
It's a daunting task, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore. We can't allow fear, anger, and mistrust to paralyze us.
Right, we have to find a way to bridge the divides that separate us, to listen to each other, to understand each other's perspectives, and to find common ground.
And maybe, just maybe, we can emerge from this challenging chapter stronger and more united than before.
It's a hopeful vision, but I believe it's one worth striving for.
Okay, so this deep dive has been intense so far. We've covered a lot of ground. But there's one more aspect I want to explore before we wrap things up, the psychological impact of these pardons.
Right, and that's a crucial aspect that's often overlooked. We've talked about the legal, the political, the emotional, but what about the psychological impact on both individuals and society as a whole?
Yeah, it's a fascinating area to consider. What does it do to a person or a society when justice is seemingly denied? So we've been talking about the psychological impact of these Capitol riot pardons, and it's clear that this goes way beyond legal and political debates. This is about our collective psyche, our faith in the system, and ultimately about how we see ourselves as a nation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at these pardons through a lot of different lenses, the legal, the political, the emotional. But how does this actually impact you directly? How does this, filter down into your everyday life, your community, your sense of security?
Yeah, that's the question we have to kind of wrestle with now.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to dismiss this as just another political drama playing out in Washington. But the truth is, this has ripple effects that go way beyond the halls of Congress.
Think about the emboldening effect this could have on extremist groups. We've already seen an uptick in threats and intimidation tactics from some of these groups.
Yeah, and this could easily lead to a climate of fear and uncertainty in communities across the country, especially for those who hold opposing political views or belong to marginalized groups.
Exactly. You might start questioning your own safety, wondering if just expressing your beliefs could make you a target. I mean, it's a chilling thought, and it highlights the need for, more vigilance and awareness in our communities.
Yeah, we need to be ready to stand up against hate and intolerance wherever we see it. And we need to demand that our elected officials and law enforcement take these threats seriously and do everything they can to protect us.
And speaking of law enforcement, these pardons have put them in a very tough spot. Can they actually protect us from these groups who now feel emboldened while also rebuilding trust with communities that feel betrayed by the Justice Department's actions, or I guess lack thereof?
And as we talked about earlier, the FBI itself is under a lot of scrutiny right now. Their role in what led up to January 6th is still pretty murky, and the appointment of Kash Patel as director hasn't helped.
Yeah, Patel has a lot to prove if he wants to restore the FBI's credibility. He needs to show through his actions that he's committed to upholding the law fairly and impartially, no matter the political pressure.
And this is where we as citizens have a crucial role to play. We can't just sit back and watch this unfold. We need to hold our elected officials accountable and demand transparency from law enforcement. Get involved in your local communities, participate in town halls, contact your representatives, make your voices heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these pardons have also kind of reignited the debate about the limits of presidential power. Should there be checks on the pardon power? Should Congress be able to review or overturn pardons?
These are some really complex constitutional questions, ones that deserve serious consideration. The Founding Fathers created a system of checks and balances for a reason, to prevent any one branch of government from having too much power. And right now, that system is being tested like never before.
Right. We can't just assume that our democracy will always be there. It takes active participation, vigilance, and a willingness to defend its principles.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Capitol riot pardons, we want to leave you with this final thought. How will you respond to this moment in history?
Yeah, will you be a passive observer, or will you actively engage in shaping the future of our nation? The choice is yours. But one thing's for sure, the actions we take or don't take in the coming months and years will have a huge impact on the kind of society we create for ourselves and for future generations.
This isn't just about politics anymore. This is about who we are as a people and what kind of future we want to build. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.